morning and welcome to the Foggy Dew. This is Colin. Well, gang, I think everybody listened to my unhinged screed about Tony Fauci the other day, so I wanted to go ahead and follow up on Fauci really quick. It's just so interesting watching Tony Fauci in the media and how everything's kind of rolled out. I think if you're listening to the Foggy Dew, you probably saw Aaron Rodgers making fun of him on ESPN. You've seen a bunch of stuff with Stephen A. Smith kind of ragging on Fauci. I think most normal people are kind of looking at Tony Fauci now with a raised eyebrow. And that's a good thing. I think for an egomaniac like a guy like Tony Fauci, having public recrimination is a really good thing. Because even though he hasn't been found guilty in a court of law, he's guilty in the court of public opinion. I mean, when you present yourself as the face of the science and then show up in front of Congress, really in front of the whole world, in front of the whole media ecosphere, and you plead the fifth 120 times, man, you're going to come across like a pretty bad dude. So I guess I just wanted to stay on top of this story because there's a couple tentacles coming out of it. And I'm recording this on Thursday morning, and just this morning, Congress actually voted to hold him in contempt. So 8-5 in a partisan vote, our Congress decided to hold Tony Fauci in criminal contempt. That it's just unbelievable, man. So that criminal contempt referral charge is going to go to the Department of Justice. Now, what'll happen is the Department of Justice will get it, and then they'll have an investigation. And really, it's a yes or no. There's no immunity involved. There's no court procedure. What happens is the DOJ would then review what Tony Fauci did in front of Congress, and then they would determine, hey, this guy was in contempt, he was obstructing, whatever the situation is. So it'll basically be an up and down vote by the Department of Justice. And the thing that I kind of take away from that, yeah, okay, great. The DOJ is going to investigate it. Here we go again with another investigation, more red meat for the base. And I don't think you need to be Kreskin to kind of figure out that that's really not going to go anywhere. So, and look, if the DOJ comes back and wants to prosecute this guy for obstruction or criminal contempt or whatever it is, hey man, I'm the first guy that's going to be jumping up and down and cheering. But barring that, barring Anthony Fauci being thrown in leg irons, you're talking months and months of paperwork and a bunch of discussions behind closed doors. Everybody's going to forget about it. And it's just going to be this thing that's kind of like underneath the social current. And then it'll pop up a few months from now when everybody's already forgotten about it. But to me, it's just more of a performative exercise looking at Congress and realizing these guys don't do anything. And I guess, look, as appreciative as I am of Rand Paul and guys like Ron Johnson, referring Tony Fauci to a criminal contempt charge or an obstruction charge, it's another shiny object for MAGA and people like myself to focus on. Well, we're going to get him this time. And look, if it works out, great. I'll be the first, like I said, I'll be the first guy jumping up and down excited about it. But it's like, it's yet again a delayed answer, a delayed response to what Tony Fauci did. And justice delayed is justice denied. Tony Fauci has other problems too. I just saw Florida subpoenaed Fauci as well. So the state of Florida is working with the Department of Justice to go after Fauci at the state level. When Joe Biden issues a pardon, that is a federal pardon. So nothing in that federal pardon stops the states from going after Tony Fauci, either criminally, civilly, whatever it might be. And look, great. I hope Florida gets after the guy. I think Lapido down there, who's the not attorney general, he is the medical director down in Florida, and you have Ron DeSantis. Those guys are serious guys. They know what Fauci did. They need to work in coordination with the DOJ, but you're talking about how long till that comes to fruition? If the state of Florida initiates a investigation into Tony Fauci today, you're talking years before that would get in front of a court. Even if all the information magically appeared today, how long would it be till anything is in a position to happen? Do you really think in 2 years they're going to have some kind of jury trial with Tony Fauci in the state of Florida? looking at his malfeasance. I mean, I talked about it the other day. Tony Fauci is 85 years old. I mean, if you're talking about a 3-year investigation, what are you going to roll him in in his wheelchair at 88 to hold to go to jail for what? Till he's 93 and he passes away? I just don't see it as a realistic option for really getting to Tony Fauci and getting to the bottom of what occurred here. And again, it's a scalp. I think that's really what this is. I think everybody just wants some kind of accountability, either at the state or federal level. And anybody that's looking at this is just watching this and realizing that it's just spinning out of reach. And I think it's so interesting because it actually gets even worse for Tony Fauci, because I think it was Tuesday of this week, HHS is now saying that they have a copy of Tony Fauci's iPhone from the pandemic. So what that means to the layperson is that we're going to get a full record of all of Tony Fauci's emails, texts, etc. during the pandemic. Everything has a digital signature when you're talking about a government phone. So they have a copy of his phone and they're going through it right now. Awesome. If you had told me that information a couple of years ago, I would be like, man, they really got this guy now. The challenge that I have with it, and look, again, it's wonderful. I'm really glad they have his phone. I'm really glad we need a full accounting of what Tony Fauci was saying and doing in the middle of the pandemic. But I guess when I look at it, it's more red meat for the base. It's a shiny object. So you're telling me now that you have a copy of it. Why did it take 6 years to get this guy's phone? The Freedom of Information Act, we should have that information readily available. There shouldn't be all these legal hurdles that are thrown up in place to get that information from a public official. By the way, the most highly paid public official. So you're going to sit here and tell me that you have a copy of this guy's phone with all the text, all the emails, and all that other stuff. And I guess my question would be, how is that any different from his diary? You have a physical copy of his diary in addition to a bunch of emails that were flying around the CDC, FDA, all these other things. How is his phone records any different than what I'm looking at right now? I already have a physical record of his thoughts. So I have a physical record of his thoughts. I have a physical record of his actions. I have a treasure trove of video, and this man's malfeasance is plain for anybody that wants to look at it. And it's funny, man, you look at this like contempt votes, phone records, state investigations. I want to believe, guys. I want to believe, but I'm jaded, man. There's been too many rug pulls from these impotent people in the Department of Justice, our FBI, and then the Republican Party. And I guess if you look at it in a vacuum, this is what I truly think happens here. Because again, it's like Barack Obama and Russiagate. Do I really think Barack Obama is going to go to jail or anything like that? No, I don't. No, I don't. But to people like this, people like an Obama, people like a Fauci, their reputation, their opinion of themselves in public is what they really care about, their legacy. That's really what they want, is they want their legacy, they want their historical place. They want all the fawning adulation of the masses, right? That's what they want. And I think it's interesting looking at Tony Fauci specifically because I hope the public pressure on this man increases. I hope Tony Fauci never sleeps again. I hope he's so worried about what could happen to him that he lives the rest of his life in fear. And I think ultimately this is Tony Fauci's legacy. That's where history will end up judging this guy. He's a horrible man who evaded justice. He was an obvious partisan and fraud that destroyed American society in so many ways. In the lasting image of Tony Fauci, right, wrong, or indifferent, I mean, maybe something happens where he gets thrown in jail or something like that. And man, let's pop the champagne when that happens. But I think the historical record is that this man is going to go down, and the visual that you will have of Tony Fauci is him pleading the fifth. A sad man, a broken man pleading the fifth. And I think in a lot of ways that's justice. Fauci knows that his reputation is destroyed. He wanted to be the center of attention. He wanted to be the media darling. He wanted to be the guy that was looked at as the American hero, the science, He is the edifice of respectable science in the United States of America. But again, the visual is going to be just this sad elf in front of Congress pleading the fifth and evading jail time. And to an egomaniac like a guy like Tony Fauci, I guess that's punishment enough. But trust me, I'm going to be watching Tony Fauci and what happens with all that very closely. So, switching gears, I wanted to go ahead and talk about the midterms really quickly because they're really coming into focus here. And I guess the best place to start is the race that absolutely everyone is watching now, and that would be the Michigan Senate race. And it's interesting, if you're not following this Michigan Senate race, you will be, because it's going to be the most prevalent thing in American politics here for the next 3 or 4 months. It's interesting. I had spoken about the Democrat candidate that was leading in the polls. It's a guy named Abdul El-Sayed. I had spoken about El-Sayed on the show before, and El-Sayed was winning in the polls in Michigan when this whole Graham Plattner thing was going on in Maine. And everybody's like focused on Graham Plattner with the Nazi tattoo and all of his malfeasance with women and all this other stuff. And then how he ended up dropping out. Everybody was focused on that like shiny object in the media, and people were really not paying attention to what was going on in Michigan, where you have El-Sayed surging in the polls. Well, here we are, and reality asserted itself. El-Sayed won the Democrat primary for Senate in Michigan. So Abdul El-Sayed beats out his primary challenger, which is a lady named Haley Stevens. He beats her on Tuesday night. And to be completely clear, this guy El-Sayed is a Democrat socialist Muslim. You have to use the correct definitions when you're talking about this. This guy is a communist. Some of his stated positions are totally insane. This guy absolutely hates the state of Israel. He wants Medicare for all. He thinks America deserved 9/11. He wants to empty out the prisons and put rapists and murderers back on the street. He supports the Muslim Brotherhood. He wants massive tax hikes to pay for all his socialist programs. And again, distill this into what it is. He is a Muslim socialist communist. Now, if you get into the actual primary voting process, if you looked at what happened like a month or so ago, the polls had El-Sayed up by 14. So he had this like massive lead in the polls going into actually the primary day. The interesting thing about it is he only beat Stevens by 2. So the race, when it actually was contested, was very, very narrow. But I guess either which way you want to look at it, at 14 points or 2 points, El-Sayed is now the Democrat Senate candidate in the state of Michigan. Now, if you look at the Republican side of the ledger in Michigan, his opponent is going to be a guy named Mike Rogers. And Mike Rogers, to be totally fair, is like this rhino-ish guy. And Rogers is obviously endorsed by President Trump, so he's adopted parts of MAGA. But if you look at his positions broadly, he's relatively milquetoast. He's not some like hardcore right-winger. But I mentioned it a minute ago, this race in particular is going to suck all of the oxygen out of the national debate as far as politics goes. All eyes are going to be on this. All political science eyes are going to be on this. And what I would say about this race as it goes into the next few months is most Democrats, I think most normal Democrats that are around you, suburban Democrats, they are not ready for this. The reality came really, really fast to them. I've said it before on the show. People normally do not pay attention to all the moving pieces that occur before elections. Like people broadly, and it doesn't matter what state it is. It doesn't matter if it's local, municipal, state, federal, whatever. People broadly don't follow politics this closely where they're following the primary process. But what I would urge you to think about, I always try to think about other people's opinions here. Imagine the blue-collar guy, like a blue-collar union dude, Johnny Lunchpail, who drives a Ram 350 truck to work every day at the steel mill. Imagine this blue-collar guy who's voted Democrat his whole life. He is now waking up today And he is realizing that this absolute radical is now the candidate for his political party. That is a shocking revelation to wake up to. Like, you're some like just normal dude. You're waking up and realizing that you're going to now be put in a position where you want to have to vote for a Muslim communist who wants to basically rip down the Constitution. That is an absolutely shocking thing to wake up to. And it's interesting because when you think about that whole discovery process of where people find themselves, if you're that blue collar guy, you're sitting here reading your morning newspaper in Detroit, and you're reading about Mandami, you've got your boots up on the table, you've got your cup of coffee, and you're laughing about Mandami when you're reading the newspaper, and you go, oh, well, that's just New York. That's just New York City. That's just some isolated deal with a Muslim communist. That's not Detroit. Detroit's like a blue collar Midwest town. And what's occurring is that after Abdul El Said wins, these same people that thought Mandami was an abstraction are now seeing the truth. And what they're seeing is the truth is that socialism and communism isn't this fringe part of the Democrat Party isolated in New York. What they're now realizing is that socialism and communism, in the Muslim tint to it, is the beating heart of the Democrat Party. It's so interesting because I watch liberal media the most. All of the Democrat pundits, the podcasts, all of the talk shows, they all thought Mandami was cute. Again, it's an abstraction until it becomes real. Mandami was like this little communist pet that was the shiny object of the expert class that pontificates on social media. And it's so funny because, like, they put Mandami in this position where it's like they want to like scare MAGA with this guy. They position Mandami as like this Muslim socialist that's going to strike fear in the hearts of lily white MAGA fascists in the suburbs. And at this point, it's pretty hard to disguise the truth. And the truth is that the Democrat Socialist Communist movement with a Muslim bend is the soul of the Democrat Party. It is not just the sanctuary city of New York with its commie governor. I mentioned Michigan just a minute ago. This isn't New York or California. This is a Rust Belt state. Michigan is in the heart of the industrial Midwest. Detroit helped build America. And from a political science standpoint, the contagion is loose upon the land. Abdul El Said represents an ideology that does not believe that America is good. His views are completely contrary to American government and exceptionalism. This man wants to alter federalism. He wants to down the system. And again, you're waking up today as a vote blue no matter who and realizing that you are now looking at your future. Normal Democrat voters are now being forced to witness this. The mirror is being held to their eyes. And look at the polling numbers. He dropped, 12 points from the initial polling? That tells you that the people that actually voted for this guy are not excited about him. And the reason why is because El Said is completely outside the mainstream of normal Democrat voters. But he just slithered through the primary process. His views are 1,000% outside like a Bill Maher or a normal like Blue Dog Democrat. And it's a mask off moment for a lot of people. Normal people meaning like suburban voters. So suburban voters are now going to have a choice. And it's so interesting because I talked about looking at yourself in the mirror. Are these suburban voters that have voted blue no matter who and supported the Democrat Party, are they going to be able to admit that they backed the wrong horse all along? Are they going to do that, or are they just going to keep pulling the lever blue no matter who? And I think the Democrat Party is facing a reckoning, and that's really what this is. This is a reckoning of your own conscience. At a certain point, if you're a normal Democrat voter that's looking around at the entire situation and go, what is happening here? And again, lens of COVID, I guess it's to me no different than COVID. Like, I pay attention to politics. Obviously, if you listen to the Foggy Dew, you're probably into politics. Most conservatives pay attention to politics. They pay attention to the primary, they pay attention to the issues, they pay attention to the social impact. Most liberals don't do that. Most liberals could not sit down and have a political science discussion, a history discussion that has any like cogent train of logic. What they do is they depend and they infer from experts. Well, somebody that I think is really smart said that socialism and communism is really good, so therefore I'm just going to follow them off the cliff. It's no different than the science. I mentioned COVID. What they do is they get some air quotes expert like a Tony Fauci, and they put this guy out there front. They say, well, this guy's the science. He's the facade of everything that's true about the government. And what they do is they completely hang their hat on the expert class. And places like CNN, places like MSNBC are more than happy to supply a treasure trove of experts for these people to nod along with. And it's nodding along to it is the correct thing, because you're sitting here still thinking in August of 2026 that the government, the US government and the establishment are worthy of your trust. If you're not questioning the experts in the establishment at this point, are you even awake? But if you look at like this communist in Michigan, what is occurring now is that these people are going to be forced to keep accepting the experts' opinions. You have the college-educated expert class, the smart experts sitting here telling Joe Lunchpail that socialism is good. The expert class told you that Mandami was a regional phenomenon. He was just a shiny object to strike fear in the hearts of MAGA, but now you're finding out that this contagion is loose in a Rust Belt state. So it's like all these people are wrong again. The experts led you over a cliff. The expert class pulled another Charlie Brown with a football on your average Democrat voter. And they keep getting fooled. It's so funny to me because if you back away from the response of the electorate, the machine and the establishment seek power. They don't care how that is achieved. If El Said accomplishes their goal of power, then the establishment is served. So the establishment really doesn't care how they get to it. It's the ends, not the means. But the means is actually communism. And the funny thing about it is, if you look at like the last 10 years, the Democrat Party and the establishment media allowed this into the party, and the pet is now eating its owner. So what I would tell you is that this race in Michigan is going to be a harbinger of things to come. And as I mentioned it before, absolutely every single political science eyeball is going to be on this. And to be fair, look, I have to believe that sanity prevails in Michigan and Rogers ends up winning. But if you're waking up today to a Muslim socialist communist as your candidate for Democrat Senate in the state of Michigan, you've got some major league red pilling going on up in Michigan. And the funny thing about it is, don't count this guy out. El Said could absolutely win. And I guess which is scarier to you? Is it scarier that this guy actually worked his way through the primary process and is in a position to do this? Or is it scary that he could win this? Because what I can tell you right now is candidates like Mandami, candidates like El Said, they're not going anywhere. There's going to be more of these people coming. So what I would tell you is, even if Rogers wins, I think we all lose. Because every blue state, every captured communist state is going to start churning these people out. And if I look at it from a response perspective, I don't think it's enough for Republicans just to kind of laugh at it. Like I see the response. I saw these people talking about like, hey, like this is crazy. It's socialism, communism, and all this other stuff. Look, the socialism and communism lectures from the talking heads on the right aren't effective. Giving me a history lesson about socialism and communism isn't changing the fact that this guy is winning primaries. And it's interesting looking at the Republican side of the ledger because I'm going to be very critical of the Republican Party and the conservative base here at this point. As a voter, the MAGA base, America First, whatever you want to call it, a broad coalition of people that were disillusioned with the establishment, voters gave the Republican Party, the GOP, a historic mandate in 2024. And the question that you would want to ask yourself 2 years later, what did we get with that mandate? We can't even get the SAVE Act passed. And if you look at the GOP and Republicans specifically, they need to grow a spine. There's no more meetings. It's like Ursula von der Leyen having meetings when Muslim invaders are landing on Kuwait. I'm done with the committee meetings. I'm done with the investigations. I want results. I want results. The establishment on the right and rhinos aren't any better here, guys. Do you think the Republican Party is meeting the moment when you have the enemy at the gates? The enemy is inside the gates. The enemy is inside the gates, winning politically, and the GOP is giving me a socialism and communism lecture. Contempt and disdain by the establishment GOP for a person like El Said does not show me results. And I watched all the response. I watched the response on both sides. The rhino class is so smug here. They think they have it made in the shade. They think that a guy like El Said is not electable. Wrong. Wrong. What I would tell you is you are now learning from Mandami and then El Said and all these other people that the Democrat Socialist Party in the United States of America is very well funded. It has a very loyal base, and it has a lot of energy. These people sprang out of the tall grass. There was nothing that existed like this a year ago, and now you have these people in positions where they could actually get into the United States Senate. And oh, by the way, Mandami is in charge of the largest city in our country. What these people are doing, again, well-funded, loyal base, a lot of energy. With social media, what is occurring is that the Democrat Socialists now are going directly to the people. What they did in this whole process is that they short-circuited the liberal establishment. El Said and Mandami have destroyed the Democrat donor class. They make their appeal directly to the citizen. They go directly to the populace. They're not sitting here with the constraint of establishment donor rules. Because in the past, it used to be that you would have to go to a Democrat donor, get all this donor money, and then you kind of walk the line in the Democrat Party. They've short-circuited that. They went around it. So they're making their appeal directly to people that are being negatively affected in this economy. And I guess by that calculation, the GOP really needs to be aware of what's going on here. And it's not just the GOP. I think it's citizens. I think the citizens need to be aware that these folks, these communists, they're not going anywhere, and they're really dangerous to your way of life. And I said it before, I'm really a single issue voter now. You have nationalism versus communism, and that's the battle moving forward. And this battle is going to happen soon. And what I really, really hope, I keep thinking about like Joe Lunchpail in Detroit, Joe Lunchpail in Michigan. I sincerely hope that normal Democrats are realizing this now. Get off this train. I really hope they see it, but I really am not holding on a lot of hope for it. And why is that? It's just because of the thought process in COVID. These folks cannot admit their mistake. They can't admit their mistake because to admit their mistake would mean that they were wrong. And what's going to happen is this expert class that keeps singing the praises of El Said and Mandami, that expert class is going to be the political Pied Piper leading suburban college-educated liberals off a cliff. And I talked about the GOP earlier. What reason has the GOP given you in the last 2 years to want more of their circus act? Disillusion with the status quo and what Joe Biden did gave the GOP the House, the Senate, and the executive. Yes, the border is closed. That is the number one accomplishment of the Trump administration at this point. And to be fair, look, there are nice things happening. Culture is coming back. DEI and woke is receding, all those other things. But my question is politically, what bold vision does the GOP have to move America forward? What is the bold vision of the GOP? And I would ask you then, are they aligned with their base at that point? Where is the base of the GOP? And all I can tell you is from my personal experience, I'm part of that base and I'm tired of the circus act. And I lived through the Tea Party in 2010. They had great ideas, they had great energy, and they had absolutely zero results. So if I'm not getting results out of the Republican Party, where do I go for results? Because if moderate steps can't be taken, then we're going to be looking at extreme ones. And extreme changes to the system, again, brings the dynamic of right-wing nationalism and communism into the fore. The GOP has had 2 years in a mandate, and they are not solving basic problems like the economy, like healthcare. You can even get into the weeds with it. The GOP with a historic mandate can't even secure our elections when it's an 80% issue with the electorate. And I could sit here on the Foggy Dew and identify every economic and political issue that ails the United States of America. But what I would tell you is that I could tell you those ills that are affecting society. But what I do know is that the GOP hasn't passed a bill since the big, beautiful spending bill. And what was that really? It was just a couple trillion in pork. Where are the policy changes? Where are the real solutions to our debt? Yes, you're cutting out some of the fraud. That's great. Where's the structural realignment of our debt? What is the plan to tackle the cost of living? How is the GOP creating a situation where Gen Z can make a living to participate in the American dream? How are we helping those kids out? And if you go beyond that, Donald Trump, as the executive, made a massive gamble in Iran, and I understand everything that he did going into it. But the problem with it is now, the Iran situation is an albatross on the GOP that was totally self-induced. Instead of fixing the debt, housing, healthcare, food costs, we have our government doing a Chinese finger puzzle in Iran now. It's like a light switch war. It goes on and off, on and off. Most average Americans, I don't care what your income level, etc., most Americans are concerned with the cost of living. Younger people especially. COVID spending was $6 trillion. How much money was blown on PPP money? So you had COVID, you spent $6 trillion. The government let in 20 million illegals. The absorption of all those bodies into our country exploded costs on the system. Those bodies and mouths that Democrats and Republicans let in exploded all of our cost structures. So you have trillions burnt. You have bad policy that got us to this position. You have unaffordable homes. These kids have college debt. We have 40 trillion in national debt. But it's just one thing after the other. Credit issues, gas costs, insurance costs. And here I am sitting here looking at this explosion of problems, and I've got the GOP in the rhino establishment wagging its finger about the historical evils of socialism and communism. The GOP pontificating to me about the historical ills of socialism and communism isn't really blowing my skirt up. And I guess my question to these people is, what is your specific plan to address these issues? And I think if you look at our government broadly, and this is right and left, this isn't a government issue. It's not a party issue. This is a stupid people issue. There are plenty of circus clowns in the GOP. And what I would tell you more broadly is that this El Said guy is just a marker of this problem. The GOP doing nothing with a historical mandate is a marker of how dysfunctional our government is. And I guess I'll get back to El Said. If you think El Said cannot win, think again. Because without sober, El Said or his ilk will win. Because without serious, sober solutions to the debt, solutions to our debt and to our society, we're in a real pickle here. And I almost feel like, I think I talk to everybody about this stuff, because this politics and what's going on and where we're headed like consumes me. I feel like most of society is like waiting for the other shoe to drop. That's really what it feels like. We're like waiting for the revolution. We're waiting for the AI explosion. We're waiting for the economy to crash. I guess my point is we're not looking forward to a brighter future. We're limping forward. And we're limping forward into like this murky future. And I mentioned AI just a second ago. It seems to me like the whole of U.S. society is like bracing for AI. Like I think like people are holding out hope that like the economy is going to be saved by AI. And I know our government, I know that's what our government is doing. And it's funny because like being saved by AI is the optimistic view of this paradigm. And I guess AI is either going to be great or it's going to be terrible. Those are kind of the two roads that you're given. And to be fair, my opinion is with AI is that it's going to be very challenging as it gets going. But I think ultimately it's going to end up being better. And I think a lot of these younger people, Gen Z, et cetera, they're going to use these tools effectively to make themselves more efficient. I think there's a lot of pluses with it, but there's going to be a lot of social upheaval to get to that point. But I mentioned the government in the context of AI, like from a political science standpoint, from a political science perspective, our federal government now is banking everything on AI. They have made a hedge bet with your future, with your kids' future. They are betting that AI saves the economy and helps with the debt. They're hoping that AI boosts production, that it boosts wealth. My opinion is they believe that AI is going to be like the rising tide, not dissimilar to the dot-com boom in the 90s. But the problem with it is that's a really big bet. It's a very big bet because it involves all of our future and the future of Western civilization. That is a bet with serious stakes that these people are making. And I can promise you, if these guys are wrong on that bet, that communism is going to be ascendant. And you're seeing that in Michigan. Marxism is going to grow in the United States of America. Unfortunately, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news. So I guess where we come out on this, or at least where I come out on it, if you want a chance, the GOP better be a lot more efficient. The GOP better start making moderate changes. We have to get rid of these rhinos faster. I think that's number one. You have guys like Mike Johnson and John Thune. These guys are a total joke. I mean, you still have Mitch McConnell hanging around somewhere. I guess Mitch McConnell's around allegedly, but like, how pathetic is that? We need guys that are fire breathers that are going to actually start making moderate changes to what's going. We need Brandon Gill. We need Tim Burchett. We need fighters that have real ideas, guys that speak the truth, that are able to use their words. And it's funny, man, like looking at all this stuff. I told my wife I want to live forever. I really did, man. We are on the doorstep of history. How fun is it? It's scary as all get out, but it's also a lot of fun. There's a whole new world emerging here. And you're going to be a part of it, and so are your kids. And I guess, look, to end this on kind of a positive note, yes, all of this is very scary. It's new. But again, anytime a challenge presents itself, there's a time for heroes. Because people will emerge as leaders even in the darkest days. But what you're looking at in Michigan right now, these are political baby steps to a whole new America. El Said in Michigan is just a baby step to the ultimate showdown of right-wing nationalism versus communism. And again, I hope I live forever. I want to see all of this play out. It's just absolutely, we live in extraordinary times and we've all got to be brave. But anyway, I'll be watching it. So switching gears, I kind of wanted to end the week on a fun note. And I guess I've talked a lot about the issues that ail America, but America really is the greatest country ever. It is. Like you look at it and the stories that you can pull out of our history are so amazing. And it's one of the things that always impressed me about America is that you can be an absolute nobody and become someone. We don't have a caste system here, right? But I think one of the funniest things, like especially in like recent politics, when people talked about how evil the founders were, and it's just a bunch of rich white men trying to avoid taxes, I think a misconception that persists in American society is that the founding fathers were all rich aristocrats. And I just mentioned it a second ago. I think certainly the race hustler class in America would want to tell you that. Oh, it's just a bunch of rich white men didn't want to pay taxes and picked up some guns. They want to tell you that America is evil, founded by racist white men. But the funny thing about it, like anything that they say, there's always a proof source that disputes their narrative. There's always a counterpoint to the fabrication. And I present to you a guy named George Taylor. And George Taylor is a founding father that you probably never heard of. So who was George Taylor? Taylor was born in Ulster about 1716. So this guy is born in Northern Ireland. This man was so poor, he doesn't even have an official birthday. They just have the year. He was a poor Irish kid born in Ulster in 1716. Dirt poor in Ireland, and all this kid wanted to do was go to America. So about the age of 20 years old, he sailed to America and he landed in Philadelphia. Now, the interesting thing about that voyage is he didn't book a ticket on a vessel to sail over with beach chairs and umbrellas, right? He had no money for passage. He had no money to get from Ireland to America. So what he did is he sold himself. Taylor sold his own labor for passage to America. So an ironmaster in Pennsylvania paid for Taylor's ticket. And in return for that, Taylor was an indentured servant. Now, who is this ironmaster? The ironmaster that brought Taylor over was a guy named Samuel Savage. So here's Taylor, about 20 years old, sails over. He's legally bound to work for Savage in Philadelphia. Taylor was not free. He arrived on American soil as the property of a contract. And you might be curious what the work Taylor had was. Taylor shoveled coal standing in front of a blazing iron furnace. So here is Taylor. He is an indentured service coal shoveler in front of a burning furnace. So after 3 years of shoveling coal, he's promoted. So Savage saw something in Taylor. He made him a clerk in the ironworks in 1739. So a couple years later, Savage died. So this Savage guy died in 1742. Well, when Savage died, Taylor, as a clerk in the ironworks, started courting and then married Savage's widow. So he marries the widow that owned the ironworks. So at that point, after he marries the widow, Taylor is then made manager of the ironworks. So Taylor runs this ironworks until about 1755. And so again, to be completely, he's an indentured servant from 1739 to 1755. All this man did was shovel coal in an iron factory. So 16 years he was shoveling coal. Well, obviously now he's married to the widow. He's in charge of the ironworks. He's more of a normalized person. He's somebody that deserves a little bit of respect. So by 1757, Taylor then became a justice of the peace in a small county in Pennsylvania. So that's his first foray into politics. Well, as the revolution kept bubbling, Taylor was very, very active in Pennsylvania politics. And he wasn't just a politician. He wasn't a guy that just sat around at his ironworks pushing paper around. He was actually commissioned as a colonel in the Pennsylvania militia. Well, if you look at the whole scope of the American Revolution, Taylor was really just a bit player until 1776. And it's interesting, in this weird wrinkle to the Declaration of Independence in 1776, the Continental Congress had voted for independence. Well, the funny thing about that vote for independence is that Pennsylvania, at the time when the Declaration was signed, Pennsylvania had 5 delegates when that whole thing occurred, meaning when they wanted to move it forward. All 5 Pennsylvania delegates to the Continental Congress were loyalists. Those 5 Pennsylvania men were loyalists, and they would not sign the Declaration, even though it had been voted on in committee. So what happened is that the state of Pennsylvania then forced all of those delegates to resign. All 5 of those guys were forced to resign. Pennsylvania, the state of Pennsylvania, replaced those 5 guys with men who would sign the Declaration of Independence, and that included Taylor. They found Taylor to sign this document. So July 2nd, 1776, the Continental Congress votes, and on July 4th, the Declaration is adopted. Well, here comes Taylor, the replacement. He's literally a replacement signatory to the document. Taylor arrived July 20th. So his first duty to Pennsylvania as a delegate was to sign the Declaration of Independence. That's the first thing this guy did when he got in there. And it's interesting when you look at the signatories on the Declaration of Independence. Taylor is a complete anomaly in the signatories. There were 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence. Only 8 of those men were foreign-born. So out of 56, only 8 were foreign-born. 3 of them were of Irish descent, including Taylor. Taylor, however, was the only man that signed the Declaration of Independence who was once an indentured servant. He was also the only iron worker or iron master that was a signatory. And I guess the last fact about him is the most interesting. Iron was very sorely needed in the actual revolution itself. Now, Taylor's ironworks, the fire that he owned, the factory that he owned, was called Durham Furnace. So that Durham Furnace actually became the first ironworks in the colonies to provide munitions to the Continental Army. So the furnace that Taylor owned supplied cannonballs, and ammunition to the Revolutionary Army. And if you look at it, on August 25th, 1776, shortly after the Declaration was signed, Taylor and his company, Durham Furnace, provided 258 cannonballs to George Washington. Now, the tale of Taylor wraps up fairly quickly after that, because Taylor fell ill shortly after signing the Declaration. He actually died in 1781. But again, Taylor, born dirt poor, became an indentured servant, shoveled coal in front of a furnace, and he signed the Declaration of Independence. Not only did he sign the Declaration of Independence, he provided the munitions to win the revolution. And if you look at a guy like Taylor, I'm really not sure if there's a more fitting story for the birth of America. Taylor was the lowest of the low. He was the lowest of the low, but he worked and he believed in himself. He bet on himself, and he signed the most important document in human history. So again, I guess, look, not all the founding fathers were rich white guys who didn't want to pay taxes. But I guess thank you to George Taylor for showing us what good looks like and showing us what it means to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. So guys, I'll go ahead and wrap the show up for the week. If you like the show, please go ahead and tell a friend about it. If you would, please follow us on Spotify. You can also follow us on Instagram at Foggy Dew Daily. If you have questions for the show, please go ahead and email us at foggydew95@gmail.com. But in the meantime, I'd ask you to say a prayer, ask questions, and stay vigilant. This is the Foggy Dew, signing off.